Hey there, everybody. It's Irene Lyon here. Welcome to this live call, this live Q&A chat on, gosh, I don't even know what day it is. I think it's the 13th of February. It is 2020, and my team and I are in a very busy time of the year because we're ramping up to the one and only time that we open up registration for my online nervous system healing rewire program called SmartBody, SmartMind. And if you have not yet learned about what this is and what it's all about and how it works and who can join, be sure to check out the links somewhere near this video, whether you're watching this on Facebook or maybe you're watching the replay on YouTube, because we're popping these videos up on YouTube. Somewhere below will be a link to SmartBody, SmartMind, so be sure to check that out. The other thing, if you haven't yet started with my free healing trauma video training, this is a 3-part series that we've been doing for as long as we've been doing SmartBody, SmartMind. And it is essential information. So even if you know that you are not going to join me for SmartBody, SmartMind, or one of my online programs, maybe you are choosing to work with someone one-on-one, or you're already in some other form of healing program, still get into these videos because they will teach you what might take someone years and years and years to find all of the information. I have been learning this stuff since the beginnings of 2004, which is a little while ago. It's been a few years, and I've compiled the basics that I believe are essential for all of us to understand. It is 100% education. We get into the science of trauma, untreated trauma, what that looks like, how our survival physiology runs the front of our bus when we're stuck in it. We get into a little bit about my history, how I got into this work, some of my mentors, some of the research, some of the science, and analogies that really show you in a simple way, but not dumbed down, how traumatic stress and survival stress shifts our physiology and how it makes us stuck and unwell. One of the videos, the third video, gets into what I call my unorthodox healing blueprint and what it means to sequence our neuroplastic healing, something that I have no doubt I will get into in this video. So the third video goes into the process of how do we rewire, how do we restore regulation back to the system. And when you can see the importance of detail and sequencing, you might start to, light bulbs start to go off in a lot of people's heads, especially my students, where they're like, wow, I didn't realize that it was important to build foundations first before doing, say, meditation practice. Or I didn't realize that these forms of treatments are not good when someone has got some form of early trauma that is not healed yet. So it's important to understand that there actually is, I know a lot of people don't like to say this, but there is a right way to work at the nervous system level. It is not something that we can throw things at and hope something sticks. And I've been doing this work for quite a while. We've had thousands of people go through my programs, my online programs, and we've seen firsthand what happens when we take this route of sequencing our neuroplastic healing. So just wanted to give a little shout out to that healing trauma training and what the purpose of it is and how it gives you that insight into this importance of working at the level of the nervous system, but in a very sequenced and sequential way. Kind of like you wouldn't ask a human baby to start talking and throwing a football as soon as they popped out of mother. You've got to teach them how to move first, how to find the world around them, how to use their hands, right? Even a toddler doesn't have the dexterity to do fine motor skills. And so we are sequenced, and it is sequential when we learn as human beings from day one, even from conception. And when it comes to rewiring and restoring regulation back to the nervous system, we have to go back to those early wires that maybe were never wired up at the very beginning. And for many of you, many of us who have survived and have gone through adversity in various early traumatic events, traumatic histories, shock traumas, surgical traumas really young, our map for safety for what we call nervous system regulation is a little off kilter, and it's written in a certain way. And what rewiring the system is all about and restoring regulation back to it, it's about rewriting that map and creating a new map so that our system knows how to navigate not only life, but our own biology. And I'll get into this a little bit more today about how we have to learn how to navigate our own biology. If we can't do that, we can't go on to these advanced practices. So I'm just going to see where my links are here. I see I've got about 25 people right now on the line. Thanks for being here early on in the call. I'm going to go right into the questions because I got 10 pages of them today. I will be honest, I may not get through all of them. And looking at all of your questions, thank you for submitting them, whether it was here on this Facebook page or in my Healthy Nervous System Revolution Facebook group. I got one from LinkedIn. Depending on where you put them in and what your question was or is, what I have seen is that a lot of the questions have the same answer. So also, let me know where you guys are listening to or listening from. I'd love to know, are you here in North America? Are you in Europe? If you're in Australia, you're probably up quite early. So let me know where you are, and let me know if you're one of my alumni or if you're brand new to this work or if you're a colleague. I'd like to know. So, all right, here we go. First question. I'm going to answer something that was actually posed on my LinkedIn page. This is from Noura, who is a coach and a mentor and an educator. So they ask, wouldn't you say that the focus on survival, and survival's in quotes, as the sole purpose of our behavior can be an oversimplification of the human experience? It can be. And I think this is a very smart question because we are more than our survival responses. However, when our survival stress, when our autonomic nervous system is a little more on all the time, 24/7, and we have this sort of hypervigilance, or the flip side to hypervigilance, but it's still survival, shut down and freeze, our other faculties are our autonomic systems, digestion, immune, hormonal, reproductive, cardiovascular, lymphatic, the flow of our fluids. All of that is impacted by our survival responses, which is fine when it is acute, when it is quick, right? So if for example, I give this example a lot, let's say something scary were to happen to me, maybe I hear a truck go through my house, knock on wood, let's hope that never happens. I would probably stop talking to you guys. I would go into a survival response to make sure that no one got hurt, that I'm safe, that all these things have to be checked. My system is going to go into fight flight, which is going to make the rest of my systems shift. We want that to happen when there's real survival. The trouble is that many of us have had lots of things occur to us, usually when we are young and even in utero, and we're starting to see that there is such a thing as transgenerational trauma, and that can be passed on to offspring and offspring and offspring up to 3 generations. If we have got this old survival stress still running our show, and there isn't an actual threat coming at us or in front of us, then our system is being driven by that survival physiology, and it'll impact all of those organ systems I mentioned. And it also impacts our ability to think, to cognitively sort through what is important, not important, urgent. It impacts our ability to relate, to feel empathy, to be attuned. et cetera, to see our environment, we are more likely to get into accidents and to be clumsy and to not see things that are right in front of us when we are living in survival. So while your question is valid, it is an oversimplification to just focus on survival. When we are in it, it drives the front of our bus, so to speak. I get that term from one of my mentors, Kathy Kane. Now, of course, healing this and shifting out of it is more than just focusing on our fight-flight response. If in my programs we were just to spend 12 weeks focusing on our survival response and not offering other means of action, other ways of learning about how to drive our intention or our attention to the environment, or to connect to our body, or to bring more of our higher brain on board, or to use various sounds and a sensory apparatus to spark up the opposite of survival. So in other words, if we weren't to do any of that stuff and we were to just focus on feeling our stress physiology, we wouldn't get very far. So because of that, it is simple, and the practices and, let's say it, the treatment plan, I don't like using the word treatment because that's very medical based, but the plan, the action plan of how we work with that survival physiology is highly diverse and very varied, very varied. So hopefully that gives you a little insight into that. If I'm saying the name right, Noura. Let me just come into the comments here. Hello, Anne from Toronto. You were an alumni from 2018, alumni for SBSM. Hey there, Yuya from Brussels. Awesome, you found me through the embodiment community. Hey, Jennifer. Hey, Suzanne from Denmark, also an alumni. Got my alumni here. Thanks for popping in, you guys. And yeah, if you're just joining right now, we've got about 34 people here. Let me know where you're from. Let me know what you're interested in. I've got a whole stack of questions, so I just got through one of them. So we've got maybe 40 more to go through. So let's see where we get to. Next question is, I'm going to do a simple one. Elizabeth asks, is acid reflux a sign of nervous system regulation? So acid reflux is when we eat food and the food goes through the esophagus, it pops into the stomach through a sphincter, and then for whatever reason, the acid in our stomach that breaks down the food goes back up, and it can burn the esophagus, it can burn the throat. It actually can really destroy, what is it called? The enamel of the teeth. This is actually one way how doctors will know if someone is bulimic, actually, because their teeth start to decay and rot because of all of the acid coming into the mouth, because we don't want that acid in our mouth. So the answer to that is yes, it can be, and it might not be. If it is, like, let's just say we eat too much, or we eat something that wasn't so great. I actually had this happen to me the other night, which rarely happens. I don't know what wasn't moving through my system properly. And I had a little bit of a tummy upset, and it was kind of like I wanted to throw up, but I didn't. But I could feel the acid coming up. Again, don't know why. I do not have dysregulation in my system. I have a very healthy gut. And for whatever reason, I experienced a little bit of, we would call it heartburn, right? But if, let's say, it isn't a food thing, and this is something that is occurring every day, then it might be, and it possibly is, due to dysregulation of the nervous system. If we think about our system, we want it to, I'm going to use my hands here to describe this. We want all of our valves in our gut, in our viscera, really all of it, to be flowing in sync with each other. Kind of like if you go to the symphony and you listen to an orchestra, you want all of the people in the orchestra, all of the musicians, to be following the conductor so that we hear a nice song, and it isn't just that chaos that you might hear when they're practicing and tuning up their instruments. So a nervous system we want it to guide, to orchestrate all of the organs in this flow, in what we could call sync. Other word for it is coherence. So everything's going in the right direction. When there's dysregulation of the nervous system, when we have, as I mentioned at the beginning, the survival responses of fight, flight, and freeze, if we have got the fight response that desperately wants to, and I'm just using this as kind of like general statements, like it wants to punch someone and it wants to run away, but it can't, so it's shutting down because it's not safe to do that. There's going to be this high drive of sympathetic with this strong drive of shutdown parasympathetic, and then that creates chaos, so that we've got some things doing this and other things trying to stop them. I can't do this with my hands in the best way, but rather than it being like this, right, flow and synchrony and harmony and homeostasis, we have this like jotted, dysregulated, chaotic situation that can cause not only acid reflux, it's also known as GERDs, it's sort of the abbreviation, gastrointestinal reflux. It also can cause chronic constipation coupled with chronic diarrhea, explosive diarrhea, just this craziness. And then, of course, when we have a gut that's doing that, our ability to absorb nutrients and really have strong immune system health is limited, because it's just a chaos, a chaotic mess in there. So 100% yes. And in that case, and that's all I'm going to say about that, because that's pretty simple in terms of how the autonomic nervous system, when it is turned on excessively and not when it needs to, when it is confused, it impacts the flow of all of our organ systems, our hormonal systems, reproductive, cardiovascular, blood pressure, respiration, expulsion of waste products, etc. Okay. Going to get to the next question from Kristen. I'm going to come back to my feed here to see you guys and connect. Hey there, Jules. Great to see your name. I'm looking forward to the restart of the program. Yes, so am I. The year has flown by. Hey there, Christy. You're a newbie from Alberta, so I'm waving to Alberta. It's over that way. Hey there, Rachel. Good to see your name pop up. Deb asks, hey, Irene, what sort of body work do you do in your course? I'll answer that in a second with this next question. So stay tuned. Hello, Linda from South Africa. Good to see you. I've never been to South Africa. I love South African accents. My doctor's South African, actually. Hey there, Melissa from Knoxville, Tennessee. Okay, I'm going to get to your question in a moment. So hang on, Melissa. I see it's about kiddos. So this is going to tie into the question that asked, what kind of body work do you do in your course, with another question from a woman named Kristen. So what Kristen writes is, so as someone who has a lifetime exposure to trauma and chronic stress, and you know what, everyone, we all have had, many of us, exposures, chronic stress. Living in our industrialized world by default has a chronicity of stress to it. And there's a question that goes really well with this that I'm going to pull up here that asks, how do we heal when we're working 3 jobs and we don't have time to rest and we have to look after kiddos and we're single parents, etc. That reality is real. So there is this level of just chronicity to our stress responses because of our need to survive and put food on the table and make a living. And as we know, this experiment, this human experiment, in some cases, in some countries, isn't working the best just because of the structure, the social systems. Other countries are better, especially countries in Europe, Scandinavia, etc., where there's just a lot more care for the populace, more tax, of course, but that goes to something for a reason. So back to the question. I sidetracked a little bit there, but I just wanted to say that this is so common. And on another call the other day, someone had said to me, it's almost spooky that you are explaining my life and all of the problems and symptoms and struggles from the healing trauma videos. And that's because while we are all very unique and complex and we all have different genetics, we also are very, very similar. We're human. And so there is an imprint of similarity within all of our physiologies, which is why a lot of the symptoms and a lot of the byproducts of stress are similar. So you say, my body is suffering from the consequences of Crohn's, so that's a digestive problem, migraines, autoimmune disease, anxiety. I basically check every box of what can happen to the body when this goes unresolved. I always suspected my health issues were a result of my experiences, so it's good to know I wasn't wrong. Yes, it is good to know. I think having that knowledge is really important, and it's very empowering, especially in the medical community who typically they don't yet understand the connection between early adversity and health troubles later in life. I've been doing the work and I'm beginning to finally get some regulation, which is wonderful. I'm having trouble with the capacity and expansion, especially when I'm out in the world and new stresses are introduced. I feel like I always take a step back in my progress. And my survival tactic has always been fight. So trying to stay out of that mode has been challenging. So I guess the question is, what are the exercises to expand the capacity? So I'm going to go back to where you said that you're starting to get more regulation. So that's wonderful. And you've said that when you go out into the world and there's new stress, that's where you kind of fall off. This is a really important point because a lot of the practices that have been taught teach people how to be calm and still in the comfort of their own home. They don't teach what is supposed to happen when they go out into the world. So for example, in SmartBody, SmartMind, we get into what we would call, it's not body work per se, to answer the question above, where we're massaging tissue, but we're reconnecting, and everyone can do this while we're watching. It feels quite nice, and my hands are cold, so it's warming them up. So it's a little selfish too, but we do things to reconnect to the body. And it isn't as simple as just this. It is intentional because I am teaching you within the program how to focus on different levels of the physiology, what we would call the diaphragms of the entire system, the joints of the system, the gut, the kidneys, the adrenals, which are like the hot spot for our stress response. We're working with the brain stem, which is back here. Everybody can say hello to the brain stem, which is deep, deep in that unconscious that forms the reactions that are unconscious that put us into survival and threat when there is real threat or when there isn't threat. Building capacity requires not just sitting with our sensations and emotions and feeling them, but doing various, I like to call them neurosensory exercises, because they're not like exercises like you would do at a gym where you're lifting weights, and not even exercises where you're doing specific breaths per se, but guiding your intention and attention to different parts of the physiology so that you can, in some ways, do a very sophisticated form of mental work, but it's at the body level. It is one of the hardest things for me to explain. There is a 15-minute neurosensory exercise that is within our Healing Trauma series. Crystal, if you want, you can pop that up in here. It's also on my SoundCloud channel. It's on my YouTube channel. It gives you a rundown of some of the basics of connecting to the ground, the environment, the breath, the body. And what I suggest is that we do this in various places and spaces. So we tend to do these things, these even meditation exercises and such, in the comfort of our own home. But as I said, we want to do this when we're out and about, where it is a little more stressful, a little more chaotic. Because if we don't, we're not training ourselves to stay present to this environment, to our breath, when we're out and about. And part of human health and teaching, we would call it differentiation, but teaching more skill, if we think of a kid, we have to take them outside. We have to expose them to different things, to different complexities, to being with other people when they're at an age where they can be with others. There's all these diversities in how we challenge the system in a positive way. So to blend these questions, one from my comment section here on the feed, and one from Kristen that submitted this. Building capacity, growing capacity requires a multidimensional approach. It isn't just about the mind. It's not just about the body. It's not just about intention. It's not just about movement. It's about putting it all together, like in this big, beautiful soup, but in various places and spaces, so that we're challenging ourselves multiple ways. And then the other thing that I'll say too to this, Kristen, when you mentioned that your default is to fight and you want to stay out of that mode, somewhere in that statement is probably some old survival energy that wants to release the fight. There might be some healthy aggression and anger and even rage that has to get out of the body. Maybe it's deep, deep grief and sadness, because emotions, when we are not allowing our emotions to flow through, they're normal part of mammalian life. When they stay stuck, here's my hand again, if the emotions are like being stuck in our system because we're not letting them come out due to conditioning, culture, whatever you want to have it, the survival responses can stay stuck. And so it sometimes goes both the other way. Sometimes we need to release some fight and flight energy to get the emotions going, but sometimes it's the other way around. This is why I wish it was like a 12-step process to say, do this, do this, do this, and this, and this. It's not that simple in this work, which is why a big part of my shtick is teaching education and the theory to the max. So you guys have gotten a lot of it within the healing trauma videos. Hopefully you've watched those. When we get into SmartBody, SmartMind, we go to the next level of education and then some. I pretty much share everything that I have learned within my somatic experiencing, my Feldenkrais trainings, and my mentorship with Kathy Kane and also Steve Terrell. They work more with the early trauma and the somatic system. Of course, I'm not teaching you how to become someone that can do this work with other people, but just like if you were my client in my private practice, I'm not going to hold anything back. I'm going to give you all the goods that I have learned throughout the last 20 plus years. So I hope that's answered a little bit more of your question too here, Deb. But we do lots of touch, but it's guided touch. I mentioned already some of the organ systems, the stress organ systems. There's a video that I did a little while ago called how to work with the stress organs, not how, but why it's important to work with the stress organs. So we get into that. We get into working with healthy aggression, moving sound through this social engagement apparatus that is our face and our senses. We do what I call Feldenkraisian learning, which is the work of Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais. So the body work is movement awareness work, but with a very fine-tuned attention on the physiology. And that's a big difference between how I would teach a Feldenkrais movement lesson versus a lot of my colleagues who don't have this training, is I'm also bringing in the layers of the autonomic nervous system, staying connected to the environment in a way that in many ways respects the survival stresses that many of us carry in our system. A lot of the lessons within SmartBody, SmartMind are working on reconnecting the head with the pelvis, with the spine, with the eyes, reconnecting the fine motor movements of the hands. My colleague and good friend and teaching partner, Elia Marak, he and I teach a movement workshop called Up and Down. Crystal can pop that in here somewhere. We do this teaching from June to the end of the year. So we're on hiatus now and we'll start up again in June. But he is also within SmartBody, SmartMind with bonus movement sessions that are so fun and very, very supplemental to the gentle work that I teach, and then he brings it to a little bit more of a deeper level. And I was trained in fitness, so I was a fitness trainer and a rehab specialist in my 20s and early 30s. So we're all about the movement. We're all about getting good body work done as well. And that's another thing, is that SmartBody, SmartMind is about the foundation. It's about reconnecting to the system, because when we have had survival stress running our show, we disconnect from the body and we don't even know how to feel or listen to it. And yet that's how we want to live, so that we have the intuition and the quality of feeling internally, so we know what our body wants. When we have that reconnection back with our system, you will be amazed at what starts to spark up in terms of knowing what you're supposed to eat, having more vigor to be active, knowing when to rest, how to interact with people. It's really quite miraculous. And what's interesting is that's how it should be, but because of our culture and conditioning and society and even religion, the way that we're forced into certain patterns and habits and ways of denying our biology and our body, we're trying to get that back. And we've been trying for quite a while, starting in the 60s and 50s with psychedelics and getting into our bodies. And by that means, and then we realized that wasn't the best way either, because it's very cathartic. And then we got into more working with just exercise, and that was really important. And then nutrition came along, and then the mindfulness movement came in, and yoga and meditation and everything. All those pieces are super important. And if I come back to what I said at the beginning of this chat, we need to sequence these things properly, because if we're not connected to our system when we are exercising or meditating or preparing food, we're going to miss really important pieces. Okay, going to go to Melissa, has a comment here. Hello from Knoxville, Tennessee. Love to go there one day. I'm wondering if SE would be appropriate for children with trauma exposure. Of course. Many of my colleagues and I myself have worked with kiddos. They are wonderful to work with because they're so young and their systems haven't been subjected to decades and decades of patterns and conditions, etc. So you say, I'm a licensed therapist and specialize in work with young children on the ages of 5 and under. These children often cannot remember their trauma. Often it happened when they were pre-verbal. Yes. And I see so many issues that I feel stem from early childhood trauma. Of course. Wonder how SE can help these children cope and improve their overall function. So this is a great question. And SE was not developed, so Peter Levine's work for working with kids was more developed for working with shock trauma. So if you're asking how can you find someone, you need to find someone who has a special knack for extrapolating the work that they've learned in SE to kids, because you can't sit a 5 or a 4-year-old or a 7-year-old down on a chair or even on a table, because some of the stuff we do is body work, and say, tell me what you're feeling inside, or tell me where your sensations are. This is why sand tray therapy, working with figurines, drawing, animal movements. So it depends on the age of the kid, but you have to get very creative with kids because their spidey senses are really strong. And if they sense that we are trying to in any ways manipulate them and force them to do something that they don't want to do, they're just going to push back more, and they're going to bring more survival stress into it. But knowing what I've seen, the key with working with kids is the parents have to be 100% on board. The parents have to be working on their own regulation as well. And they have to understand that little Johnny or little Susie is maybe hitting them, not because they're trying to be mean, but because they have let's say an old surgical trauma that is still in their system, not resolved. And they desperately want to just strangle the doctors and nurses that were handling them when they were young. Even if that child was an infant and had no clue that they were cognitively in a hospital, there is a somatic, we call it procedural memory in the system that wants to push away, that wants to do these things to get those people away from them. And when you have the lens in your I'm looking for the word, in your rubric, in your somatic rubric of what these movements and these behaviors mean, if you're really good at that attunement, you will know and feel and know how to help them move those survival stresses out. So 100% yes, everyone's going to be different. The different types of traumas will be very indicative of what you do. I just gave an example of, say, surgical trauma, but there's so many different things. I mean, the other day I heard about someone who, I won't use specifics, but a child who would refuse to eat vegetables, just won't eat them. No trauma with vegetables, nothing, but it got traced back to the fact that when he was really young, he was forced to use a sippy cup before they were ready, and wanted to still use a bottle, and the child was forced to put something in his mouth that he didn't want to. And it's so hard to say, how can you make that connection between sippy cup too early and never wanting to eat vegetables? They are connected. And the connection is that there was something that was imposed on that little one too soon. They didn't like it, and the person imposing it was not attuned to the distress that little one was feeling. So the other thing is, we don't have to remember the traumas, but the therapist or the somatic practitioner has to have an intelligence in their own system. And this is where I think a lot of our somatic trainings fall short. There's no prerequisite to ensure that you are regulated when we go into these trainings. I did a Q&A on this, Melissa, that I will encourage you to watch. My assistant Crystal can pop it up, where it's all about trauma training at this somatic level. Be sure to watch that. But all in all, the answer is yes, but you have to find the right person. Or if you want to start becoming trained in this, if you're kind of headed in that direction, then I would recommend you check out SmartBody, SmartMind. It will not give you trauma training, but if you are already a really solid therapist, you will be amazed at what you can pick up naturally by just having the eyes to see these things. And if you're working with kids, they are so easy to work with, I will say that. So, and they're really fun to work with. Okay. Christy, what are your thoughts on trauma and disease, especially as a teenager while eating a grilled cheese sandwich? I got the call my father was dying. Now as an adult, I have severe gluten intolerance and dairy sensitivity. All functions of the body are affected by trauma, creating connected. Yes. So I won't get into all those pieces, but what you just described is identical to what I just talked about with that's kind of spooky actually, the sippy cup and the vegetables. It's something that we call in the work of Peter Levine and in other somatic practices, overcoupling. So things are stuck together and they don't make sense. So part of healing from that and shifting is separating the one highly stressful piece, so call that your father was dying, with something as innocuous as eating a grilled cheese sandwich. And it might seem almost hard to believe that someone can become gluten and dairy intolerant from that, but your system went into a survival response, and I don't know what occurred, but the system started to cascade. Emotions maybe started to come through. Maybe they were not allowed to come out in the way that they wanted to. And so if there was emotion held in and you're eating this grilled, I mean, I love grilled cheese sandwiches, so I get it. You're eating this sandwich, that food will then be seen as danger, but it's not, right? Unless a person has a true, and there are people that have true allergies and intolerances. But when it pops up like that, that is a clear indication of a connection. And we could sit here for 5 hours talking about some of the crazy stories I have heard about how we trap these old things that that we don't even think are related to the event that maybe was occurring, etc. So 100% yes. Trauma and disease really, from what we've seen, they go hand in hand in so many ways. So a great book, actually, I've got it sitting right here, that talks a lot about that is this one. It's called Trauma Spectrum by Robert Stayer. There's chapters in here that are actually titled Trauma and Disease. What he says is really, and also Gabor Mate's work shows these connections. And then, of course, the key is we know that that's there, it's happening. What do we do to unravel it? That comes down to working with the physiology, working with the images, the memories, the feelings, all the things that occurred in that moment, but not in a big explosive, let's just go and like fix it in one go. We have to work gently with the system, especially if this has been something that's been with you for quite a while, which my sense it has been if you are now an adult. Okay, I'm going to get into some of the other questions that were sent to me via written text. Meg asks, this is from the Healthy Nervous System Revolution Facebook group. My question is how to get the body out of fight and freeze when you recognize it, but I'm working 3 jobs to pay bills and it leaves little time to process and my body is in a great deal of pain. So this is a reality that many of us face. And it's important to also know that the work that we can do to start to separate and loosen the grip on our nervous system can be done anytime. And what is important is that we know that it doesn't have to be done by taking a whole gear off and just healing. While that would be lovely, it also isn't realistic. So it comes down to priority. It comes down to doing little bits of learning, little bits of practice, and then finding moments when you're commuting, when you're driving, when you're, not to be descriptive, but I will, when you're sitting on the toilet having a pee or a poop during your workday, that's solo time. Can you connect to the system? Can you feel your breath? Can you ensure that you're still with your body while you're doing those jobs? Any moment that you can reconnect to the system, feel it, have moments where you look away. I mean, I'm looking at you guys now through this camera screen, but I'm often looking outside, looking around, looking at my papers, my books, as a way to keep my system in this homeostasis while I've got energy going out and I have energy going towards me from you guys. So it's possible. We've seen it happen with people that are very busy, and it all comes down to intent, prioritizing, and doing little tiny bits. And little tiny bits can actually do a lot over the course of a year. And I know from seeing some of our emails and communications from our folks watching the healing trauma videos, just having the knowledge alone is starting to shift how they see things in the world. So know that you can start the work. It's just going to be slower and smaller. And in some ways, I believe that's better than just stopping everything and focusing on one thing. It's more realistic. And you might find that the capacity to be in these jobs and to not be as tired, for example, at the end of the day will be higher because you are recycling the stress, and you might not be letting new things that you're feeling that are stressful stick in the body. If you haven't watched video number 1 of the Healing Trauma series, this is for everyone here. I talk about who remembers the swimming pool and beach ball analogy, and that really from this moment forward, if you are here and you want to really learn this stuff, whether you join me for SmartBody, SmartMind or not, there's no reason to not stop and sense when something is activating you or when an emotion comes through. The only thing that'll stop us from feeling that, processing it, giving ourselves the time, the rest, the pause, is the brain that's saying that we can't, because we can. And of course, granted, it's safe to do so, right? I don't want you to process a trauma in the middle of you crossing a street in traffic, right? We need to be smart about this. But to know that when you are in a safe space, when you can start to move through things that are coming up, there's no reason not to start to feel those things right now. Okay. Next question from Jody asks, I'm a body worker and yoga therapist. Let me just take a little bit of water, you guys. So I'm a yoga therapist and body worker for 25 years, and I've done a lot of personal work aside from the obvious transformations that can't help but happen when one goes through intensive yoga teacher training and massage therapy training. I get it. My question is, what does healing really mean in terms of the body and the nervous system? Does healing, and you write this in quotes, mean all our symptoms affecting our physical, mental, and emotional states go away forever? Does it mean simply digesting and integrating our past traumas so that we are no longer triggered and are driven by them? So I want to know how healing is truly defined. And I have many colleagues and practitioners who like to claim that they are healed or have healed themselves. I know many who tout themselves as healers, and I have clients who consider me a healer. I really want to understand what the process is of healing and how it's relative to the nervous system and the whole human in general. Can you speak to this? Of course I can speak to this. So people used to call me a healer. I despise that term, to be honest, because I am not, when I did my work and when I do my work now, I am not there magically, potioning a person for them to change. I'm offering the education, the practice, the work, the support, if you will, so their system can take over their healing. Because essentially, it's the internal systems, just like if you get a cut, and your immune system is good and you don't have a clotting disorder, it starts to do its thing. It starts to clot, it scabs, it heals, etc. However, we know, if I use that example, when someone has a compromised immune system and they are living with, let's say, complex PTSD or something that indicates that the system is living in high survival stress, that cut is not going to heal quickly. It might stick around for 3 months when it really should heal in a matter of a week. So while that person is healing the cut, the person that takes forever, their system's dysregulation is disrupting the healing. For example, I might have ate something funny the other day because I didn't feel well at night. My system had to figure out and heal what was going on. It was probably a bacteria that I didn't like. So in that instance, my system is healing. We could say that our system is always healing itself. We want it to always be healing, repairing, regenerating, fixing up tissues, destroying cancer cells, bacteria, viruses. And then there's this idea that, oh, I want to get healed and never have to deal with anything. This is false. I know of people who are my mentors in their 70s, 80s. Even Peter Levine said this in an interview the other day. When he goes to Switzerland, he works with a dream therapist to work on stuff in his own system. That is, to me, and I know this, an indication that there are so many layers in our system. At this point in time, in the universal time of humanity, I don't know if us here will ever be fully free of every single 100% trauma, because there are things that have occurred to us as a collective that I think we're all working on. And I don't say that to discourage anyone. I say that as a reality check, because it isn't about have I gotten them all out of my system. It's do I have the tools to know what to do with them when they come up and out. And true story, I have processed some of my deepest shock traumas in the last 2 months. I've had vertigo, dizziness, waking up in the middle of the night, massive pain in my head and neck from the probably countless whiplashes, hundreds of whiplashes I've incurred, and a few concussions in my day as a big skater and skier in my youth. And one might say, well, that doesn't show that you're at a good spot and that you're not regulated, and that's not true. I have solid regulation in my system. These are just old things that are coming up that I knew were there, but I had no clue that they were going to surface in the last little while. So, and because you're a body worker, Jody, what opened this up is I had a fabulous osteopathic session with someone who has the lens of the nervous system in their toolkit, and something got opened up and it was like, game on, let's move this stuff out of the system. And since I have my capacity, although it is already big, feels a bit bigger. And it's because we've gotten rid of some of those balls, again, back to video number 1 from the Healing Trauma series, that I didn't realize were still sitting in there. So I don't think that there's such a thing as if someone says that they're 100% healed and they've completely healed themselves, I'll be really bold to say, go the other way. I think that is reckless. I think that it's very possible that they have no clue how much is still stored in their system. I've worked with some top-notch people who are well-regulated people who've been doing this work longer than me, and they are still working through their stuff. So again, I'm not saying that to be a stinker, but I'm saying that because this is my experience. And if we say to someone, come join me and you're going to get 100% healed by the end of this 12-week program, that would be false. And I think if there's any of my alumni listening to this, you might be able to post some comments about this for the newbies here, to know that it isn't about getting to this end point and saying, okay, I'm done. It's like to say to someone, go get fit or go improve your diet, and then when you reach this level of fitness, stop. You all understand how that doesn't make sense. We have to keep eating well. We have to keep being moving, or else our body will break down. We've seen, and I think we've classified healing trauma and working with trauma kind of like it's an infection that we're trying to take a course of antibiotics for, or it's a cancerous mole on our skin that we're having biopsied out so that it's no more. And it's not like that. And this is why I think we're in a really interesting point in time, because the structure by which our brains see healing is very much lined up with diseases and infections and broken bones and things that we are familiar with in the medical community. This other community of working with the mind, body, environment, spirit level, if we add in the spirit and soul in there, I don't think that this is something that there's an end point. Just like healthy living doesn't end. We either are doing it or we are not doing it. So to kind of wrap up that question, Jody, you got me going a little bit, is we're healing. And I think we either are healing or we are not. And when we are healing, I think the universe opens up for us in a way that is very good and offers us opportunity. When we're stuck and we're denying it and we're not listening to what our system wants, I have seen in my experience, things don't go well for people. And it doesn't mean that, we're all going to reach some form of crazy enlightenment where I don't want to go into that route, but I think that we need to know there are layers. We should always be healing if we want to go down this path, and know that if we know about it and we deny it, that also poses a problem too. It's kind of like the movie The Matrix. When you know about it, it's hard to not see it. And for some people, it might not be for them. So I will get off my soapbox on that one. Next question from Cassandra. When starting to work with healing the nervous system and teaching it regulation, can you get new bodily symptoms? Yes, you can. Having started having migraines every month before my period, teeth grinding, tight hip flexors, sore, stiff, and lower back. I haven't had a panic attack for over 6 months now, and I feel like my anxiety is much better. That's really good than it used to be, but I'm just wondering, as I am working through things bodily, this is very common, Cassandra. And what's interesting is that when we have stored survival stress, untreated trauma, scary stuff that's happened to us in our system, and you said you haven't had the panic attack for a while, the next level can be all of the bracing in the tissues, like the muscles, like you've just said, the tight hip flexors, the grinding of the teeth, the migraines. I know this doesn't sound very fun, but when we start to move these survival responses out, the next layer that shows up can be, and often is, the other physiological responses that we're clamping that survival energy down. And while it's not as fun, when it's coming out to the surface, that's an indication that that survival stress is less circulatory, and the adrenaline, the cortisol is less, which is then less toxic on your organ systems. So I would be interested to know, like, have you found that while your teeth are grinding and you have a bit more pain, has your immune system improved? Has your digestion improved? Has it improved? While there might be a migraine, has the quality of your menstrual cycle improved? So those are signs that the system is actually gaining more regulation. What does suck is that, and I can attest to this, is those pains, those physical pains that are coming out are the old things that we never felt early on. And I, again, can attest to this. When I was healing some of my traumas around being exposed to a lot of chemicals when I was young, it was all coming out on my skin. It was horrific. If you go to my website and read my my bio, my long bio, there's a few pictures of me only, maybe about 9 years ago. And it wasn't fun. It was very uncomfortable. It was very painful. It was like third degree burns. And my mentor, Kathy Kane, didn't like her at the time, but she said to me, she gets really excited when someone has a rash, as a way of their traumas and the things coming out, because we can see it. So when we can see it and feel it, it's good to almost be grateful for the fact that we can see it and feel it, because a lot of people are living with things brewing in their system, but they can't see them and they can't feel them. And this is where we find things like cancers popping up, heart disease popping up. A person is fine, but then all of a sudden one day they are so sick and unwell, and then they find out they have cancer that metastasized through their whole body. And that doesn't just happen overnight, right? So again, not to scare us, but this is how we get unwell. And when we think about the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that has really shown the connection between untreated early trauma, adversity, being subjected to tons of stress when we're young, the laundry list of troubles and diseases, mental illnesses, autoimmune, it is long. It isn't just chronic illness or anxiety. It is arthritis, it is autoimmune, it is cancer, it is heart disease, it is addiction, it's risky sexual behavior. It is all these things that are sort of plaguing a lot of society right now. So all that to say, yes, it is very common when we start to work with this stuff that we will feel all the old patterns that kept us protected and safe and not letting that survival energy out. So being 100% honest there. I'm thinking of a time when we were working with Peter one day in a class, and he was doing a session with someone, and some of our colleagues weren't happy with him, because I roll my eyes a little bit there, because he was making the woman, not he wasn't making, but he was pushing her to feel the discomfort in her body, because she kept ignoring it and ignoring it. And at the end, he said, look, people aren't coming here so that they just feel all rosy and nice. They're coming here because they want help to heal these old things. And doing that might mean feeling the uncomfortable things that we denied or weren't old enough or aware of enough to process. So this is kind of like big girl pant work. You know, this is adult work here. It's not to be taken lightly. And that's why when we do move through my programs with our students, we're adamant at saying you must go at your own pace. And that will also bring up all the old shame responses from maybe not keeping up in school. And that's fine. It's an opportunity to work with all those old conditioned patterns, but we need to go slow enough and intelligently enough so that the system can start to unravel these pieces in gentler ways, as opposed to being out for, you know, weeks not able to move. So again, just the truth there. Lisa Marie asks here, how you guys doing? Where are we at right now? Time is really flying. 59 people are here. I see some questions. I will get back to the feed here in a moment, you guys. Lisa Marie asks a very brave question, and I love this one. How can I be confident this will work? So I'm assuming you mean the work that I teach in my program, SmartBody, SmartMind. So the first thing is each of us has to believe that we can get better, and I know that we all can. If you're here watching this video, you have neurological function to bathe yourself and feed yourself and take care of a living environment to a certain level. If you're here and you have those faculties, my hunch is that you can do this work, your system can heal. The one caveat to that is you have to believe that you deserve it. And that will challenge many of us who were brought up in very toxic environments, scary environments, environments where we were shamed toxically and we didn't have a solid connection, and we were told that we were worthless and we shouldn't be alive, which sadly happens to many children. So that imprint that is somatic will challenge our belief that we can heal or that we deserve it. So that's number one. You got to believe it and you got to deserve it. And I'll say right now here, you all deserve it. It's just a matter of making that decision for yourself. The second is what we get, or what you get in SmartBody, SmartMind, isn't just one thing, right? So a lot of people will ask, Irene, what do you think about this method or that method? And they all have a time and a place, but the beauty of SBSM, SmartBody, SmartMind, is that it is bringing in the work of my studies in somatic experiencing, the work of my studies in the Feldenkraisian methods, and the work of Kathy Kane and Stephen Terrell. So working with the somatic level, the survival stress level, that early trauma level, it's bringing them all together. And I've got that background in biomedical science, health science, and I have a crazy knack for making things simple and guiding you through with intention and attention audio lessons that are very powerful and potent. So there's a big blend. It isn't just one thing. And I think that's the uniqueness, I know that's the uniqueness of SmartBody, SmartMind, is we're not just getting one thing that I have developed because it helped me. I got into this work for the other reason. I saw a problem, a missing piece in my work as a body worker. And so I went searching for what my clients needed, and I found this work, working with the trauma, working with the early stress responses, working with the physiology, the fascia, the gut, the brainstem, the kidneys, the adrenals, the heart, all that stuff. So again, there's a lot there, more than one thing. The other thing, Lisa, is I'll encourage you to read the stories. So head to our SmartBody, SmartMind page, and there'll be client stories, and take some time to read some of them because they're very compelling. And a lot of them will say, I didn't think this was going to work. I'm thinking of one of our students, Amy Kubanik, who literally said, I did not think this was going to work. I didn't expect anything to happen. And something happened. So there's a lot of great stories there that I would love for you to check out. I won't name any of them. Just head there, see the faces and the names you're drawn to, and read some of them. Okay, I'm going to get back to the feed here. Hey, Megan. Okay. Have you seen child apraxia of speech help with nervous system work by chance? My nephew was speaking around 1 year old, and then he stopped speaking. Oddly enough, it was after his vaccinations. I'm not sure if it could have been traumatizing to the little one, and maybe that caused him to stop speaking. I know you're not a doctor, just not sure if you've seen this at all. I haven't seen that specifically, so I don't know how old he is now. I can't really consult over this way, but I'm thinking of someone right now whose child wasn't speaking. I don't know why they weren't, but they did do this work. They actually sought out Peter. This was back in the 70s, and it helped. I don't know the history of that child. I don't know the other histories of this child. There are other things that have to be considered. So, because I don't want to say it was because of this. If we have had something occur to us when we were really young, so even in utero, and then something occurs to us, and I talk about this in video number 1 about the car accident, if you remember that, there can be an original event that gets sparked due to something later. And because the system hasn't resolved that original event, that other trauma or that other stress kind of cracks the system open. And so it really depends on the situation, the calmness of the parents. I've seen a lot of young kids who are being kind of pointed at and blamed for being anxious and unwell. And really, I meet some of their parents, and the parents are very anxious and very unwell and are overly on their kiddos in a way that would make me anxious and unwell. So again, it really depends on the situation. I think it's important to, if the little one is still really young, to find a somatic therapist that can work with him to see if there are some old procedural memories that are not getting out of the system. I think that's really important. Okay, I'm just going through the comments here. Hello, hello, hello. Deb asks, do you live stream your up and down workshops? No, we do not. It really is an in-person experience. So it's in person, not live streamed. Elia and myself, we do some online drop-in classes. I have one happening this Saturday. I don't know when his is next, but he does them once a month. Of course, they're not to the same level that one would get at the up and down workshop. So if you can make it, I highly recommend it. It is an amazing 4-day experience. Okay, good. Thank you, Crystal, for answering. And Anand asks, you may have touched on this already. If someone has never been emotionally regulated from early traumas and subsequent adverse experiences, is it possible to regulate your system if it has been in dysregulation from the beginning? 100% yes. And the one caveat to that is we have to make sure that we have relative safety in our environment. And this is something that is tricky because for some people, they still live in environments, in countries, and situations where it is not 100% safe. And we can still do a lot of work to build capacity, build regulation, build connection to the system, so that these earlier experiences can start to, I keep seeing, like, stitch back up and heal and integrate. So 100% yes. Okay. Hey, Josephine. Good to see ya. Josephine is our longtime alumni since 2017. Has it only been since 2017? Thank you for chiming in here. I'll read what you're saying just because if someone's listening to this on YouTube, they won't be able to see it. But you said, I'm an alumni and have been since 2017. SBSM to me is the missing link for healing. I'm a body worker. With this work, I know exactly what's going on internally and externally, and we have the tools to work with this always. It's true what Irene says. It's true, I don't lie. It takes time to work through our stuff, and what I notice, albeit it doesn't go away straight away, there are shifts, changes, and movement. I just noticed yesterday I have a small rash, so I'm excited to know something is shifting and moving through me. This stuff works. Yay for the rashes. It took me a while to actually be able to say that, but it's true. Of course, if you have a rash because you're exposed to a toxic chemical, that's different. Then you want to heal that and take care of it. Or if you have a burn or a hive from something you've eaten that doesn't agree with you. But if it's like in Bob Scare's book here, he talks about stigmata, which is things coming up out of the body that don't make sense. When something doesn't make sense, usually it's an old thing that is popping up. Okay. Okay, I'm going to come back to my questions here. Gosh, I'm only on page 2, you guys, and I've got 10 pages. We'll have to reconvene next week and do this again, and I'll have to work through these. All right, Manideepa asks, how do you navigate relationships with family who are still quite deep in their trauma? Well, I understand the answer to this will vary. It would be great if you could speak from your experience with some examples on how people have done this in their healing journey. Well, here's the thing. Humans have an over-reliance I have experienced on family, and I know that might seem a little harsh to say. However, if we know as adults that our family system is toxic and abusive, which many are, we have to make a decision as to whether or not we want to stay connected and or disconnect. And everyone's situation is going to be different. So it really depends on whether or not that family system is still actively abusive or they're just stuck in their own, pardon my language, crap and creating misery in their own life. And we can let them do that. But we have to have a very strong boundary to know that's them. And yes, they created me and I have to do me and they can do them. I've also seen, Manideepa, that when we start to really take ownership of our own system and in many ways just move forward and know stuff happened, it wasn't nice, but now I'm responsible for me. And my, let's say, family, maybe if you have a family yourself or career or a partner, this is my stuff, I'm going to heal it, and I'm not going to put energy into them. Sometimes the family system will shift by true virtue of you just shifting yourself. This is where that whole, everything is all happening at the same time and we can influence our past. I believe that, and we can influence our future, obviously. So it all comes down to personal situation and where we're at. Of course, I know, many people are still dependent on their family, and that sets up a tricky situation. Financially dependent, dependent for shelter and food, and that's where there needs to be, again, strong boundaries so that the person in question can individuate and become independent while still having connection to that family system. I hope that gives a little bit of insight in there. And it's tough when there's culture involved because we're taught that we have to take care of our elders, and I agree that that is important. And if they are still, in a sense, abusing us, we wouldn't stay in a room with someone who is beating us. So why would we continue to stay in a family environment where we're maybe being verbally attacked, emotionally attacked, or not allowed to be who we are. And that's what it really comes down to, is how can we do this work and become who we are when we've maybe never known it because we've been so conditioned due to our family system, due to our culture, religion, etc. Your second question feeds into a lot of others, Manideepa, so I'm going to answer it as well. Can you speak more about how early developmental trauma causes a deep desire, yet a visceral fear of connection with the self and others, and how can one go about breaking this self-perpetuated cycle of isolation? Particularly how to explain or make someone experience connection who has no clue or who has never experienced true connection in their life. So this is a very common conundrum when there has been early and developmental trauma, which is very vast. It isn't just necessarily a child that was mishandled and mistreated. It could be surgical trauma. It could be being born prematurely. It could be a mother or a father, but usually the mother who is unwell herself and just isn't able to put the energy into attuning to her infant. And it isn't because she doesn't want to, she just doesn't have her own life force energy to address and attune to the little one. So I'll make it quite simple. When we are young, like pre-verbal, we really need someone. There is a desire to reach and connect and have that connection. And there's also a need for us to say to our caregiver, I've had enough, I need a break. And so there is this constant reaching and pulling away that needs to be honored and respected and attuned to by the caregiver. And if it is not there, the little one who is purely somatic, purely in their physiology, has this confusion because they are like, I want you, but when I go to you, you're not there, or you're harsh to me, or you touch me in a way that makes me, contract. But then I need you, but I don't want you, and I need you, and I don't want you. And then this confusion is what drives, in many ways, what you said here, this desire. But then when we have it and we get it, we feel almost disgusted, right? It's like, I want connection, but then when I get it, it feels gross and I want to walk away. And that is a very strong pattern when we've had these early ruptures and these misattunements from our caregivers. So I hope that answers your question. I'm going to head to our comments here. I'm going to end in about 8 minutes, you guys. I need to respect my own boundaries and stop sitting in a little bit. But I have these questions, and we will work through them. We will work through them. Hey there, I've got two Michaels, both with S's in the last name. Michael, the first one says, for me, it's odd pains that don't make sense. Yeah, here's what's interesting is our physical reactions and our sensations, they may not make any sense. And this is where our higher brain wants to make sense of them because of our prefrontal cortex and our brain wants to make sense. But this is where the education that we teach, whether it's through these bits of information, through these Q&A calls, or in the programs, when we have the higher level knowledge that there might be something strange occur, that's not a bad thing necessarily. One of the favorite things I would hear when I was in private practice, and I'd be sitting with a client and they would say, this is going to sound really weird, and every time I hear that preface what they're going to say, I get a little excited, because it's showing me that they're feeling something that is foreign and novel and probably really important. And it might be a weird image, it might be a thought that doesn't make sense, it might be a strange sensation that they can't describe. And I just say, yes, that's important. So that is my little bit on that. Michael, the next Michael says, hey, Irene, I'm running a men's group where we all share our experiences through narratives. What could be the first way to introduce polyvagal theory without overwhelming these gents? Well, one of the ways is to have them all say hello to someone at the beginning. I have an article I wrote a little while ago called the how to create safe space in a group setting. That's not, I'm paraphrasing, but it's ways that we can break the ice is really what polyvagal theory is when it comes to that ventral vagal. But to put a group of people at more ease and settling, we need to make sure we know who's in the room. And often, like when I teach group workshops, there are too many people so that we don't have time for everyone to introduce themselves. We get people to partner up, and we don't get people to ask deep stuff. We actually will say things like, what's your name, where do you live, and what did you have for breakfast? Or what did you have, when was the last time you saw a movie, and what did you like about it? And the reason we ask for something that isn't trauma-based or narrative-based is it's safe, and it gets the speech going, and it gets the ears going, and that is one aspect of the polyvagal theory. So definitely play with that, because making the individuals in the group be settled and know who's there is very important for allowing what is there to come up, to open up in a way that is safe for them. And introduce them to, you could send them the healing trauma videos and get them to learn a little bit about it. I have a video I did a little while ago on the polyvagal theory, which is, people are like, well, it's just a theory. How do we know it's real? Theories doesn't mean that it's still being figured out. It means that it's like the theory of relativity isn't a theory, it's a real thing. So the polyvagal theory is a real thing that we know through researching the vagus nerve. But check out the article, or not the article, that article I mentioned, and the video from, I think it was the summer, where I talk about the polyvagal theory and all the differences in it. Yeah, so there we go. Let's see what else here. The name of the book Irene mentioned, was it this one, Trauma Spectrum? Robert Scare. It's a fairly dense book. There's no treatment in this. This is, again, most of these big books. I have another one here that I'm going to mention in a second called Scared Sick. Great book, but it's all very much research-based. Most of these books don't have treatment and exercises, because most of these authors are either science writers or they are scientists. They're not practitioners, they're not clinicians, they're not teachers of movement and nervous system healing. So that is the book I think that I mentioned. Hey Ingrid, some tears. I think it looks like you figured out something, but the discuss piece, perfect. So I'm glad that there was a little piece that you got unlocked there. Okay, let's get into a few more. I'm actually going to go to, where is that question? This is from Harriet, and it's a really important one, and I think I'll end on this. So Harriet, you asked this in the Healthy Nervous System group. So I would like to know if there is theory that is backed up by neuroscience with evidence such as brain scans demonstrating change and published papers. I'm assuming you mean for the work I do in my program, or do you mean the theories and the work of Porges? Yeah, you mentioned Polyvagal and Peter's work. And so you've asked a few neuroscientists, and they fully believe that it's theory only at present, such as the polyvagal theory, and there is not a massive amount of evidence except anecdotal. So I'm going to answer this in a few ways because it's important. First of all, anecdotal evidence is how we first start learning about something, like scurvy, vitamin C. That wasn't a published paper. We just saw that all these sailors were having gum problems and problems with their teeth, and it was because they weren't getting any fresh fruits and vegetables. That is technically anecdotal evidence. There's a situation, we document it, and then we go and study it. The ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, while that isn't it is peer reviewed and it's published, it's not a double-blinded placebo-controlled study, and I'll talk about that in a second, but it is pure epidemiology, and epidemiology is studying trends, studying what we've seen over long periods of time in large populations of people. And that study, while it was originally for weight loss, and I talk about this in another SoundCloud audio that I have. I'll get Crystal to pop that up because I don't want to get into the history of that study. But basically, they have found over thousands and thousands, and like the original sample set was 17,000 people. That is a lot. That when there is early stress, early adversity, that over time and in adulthood, if that is not treated, and none of these people had treated their early trauma, because no one did that back then, it was causing these illnesses. Now, again, is it causal? Is it just correlation? Of course it was correlated, but the evidence was so strong because it was replicated in other countries that we cannot deny that when there is severe early stress, dysregulation of the nervous system, the system does not repair. It does not have the capacity to recover, to immune enhance, to repair the gut. And over time, the system breaks down. It loses its resiliency. The blood vessels of the system wear out. The immune response does not happen. The brain, we've seen this. And if you look through, I got another book here. Where is it? If you go through this book, which is very thick, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, he has a lot of studies in here. He has brain scans of brains that have been under stress. And there's changes at that brain cellular level when we have repeated stress. But this book is amazing. It's a little depressing, but it's the research. It's pretty much showing the ACE study and all of the other research that backs that up around the role of childhood trauma in adult disease. And very well written. It's written by Robin Carr Morse and Meredith Wiley. But again, all theory. So when we look at the ACE study, when we look at what Porges has discovered in his labs, when we look at the research of Michael Meany, I actually pulled his thing up here. He is a Canadian scientist who has really shown, I'm going to put this into the, can't see if I can do this. He's studied rats and attunement and care of rat pups over many generations. And he's really shown that when there is nurture, the rats, which are mammals, survive and they're healthier, even if their mothers were stressed. So I won't get into the full bit. So that's one piece of research that's super important. Rachel Yehuda's work around transgenerational trauma and epigenetics, also really important. I'll pop that in here. This is why I wanted to get to these because I actually pulled some resources up. And Scared Sick, I'll get the link and I'll put that up. And, you know, in this book, I think it was this book where the people at the Center of Disease Control for the United States got into this research and they looked at it. They looked at the ACE study. And the one research, his name is Robert Anda, who joined Dr. Vincent Felitti, who was the founder of the ACE study and this crazy connection. He said that he started to cry when he looked at the statistics. And I just got shivers saying that through my whole body because he had studied smoking and poor choices of food and not enough exercise and addiction and all these things that people at the CDC study to help the population and the populace be healthier. And because he was, I think, a statistician, he understood the math, the science. He's like, if this is true, and we pretty much know that it is true now, this epidemic of childhood stress and childhood trauma and abuse is the cause for most of, if not all of our medical, social justice problems. It's all there. And if I think back to when I did my science studies when I was in academia. I did my master's in research. Having been in labs and watched high-level placebo-controlled, peer-reviewed papers that were submitted to journals, and seeing some of the ways in which statistics are fudged and lab students that aren't proper in how they do procedures and protocols. Now, I know that was the one university I was at, but it was fairly well reputed in the sciences. I don't always need to see a published paper because I see what I see with my own eyes. I know from the epidemiology, specifically with the ACE study, how strong that is, and really hard to deny. There's a wonderful, Crystal, if you can pull up, it's a tribute to Dr. Vincent Felitti. It's a wonderful, I think it's maybe 20 minutes that I recommend everyone watch about his history, how he found the ACE study and what it really showed us in terms of our health and well-being. It's pretty compelling. So again, anecdotal evidence is what we always have first when we have massive discoveries, and then we prove it over and over and over again. And it's important to remember that science is not necessarily truth. It is the seeking of truth. And so when I look at my students who have been deemed not fixable and have been trying to heal their bodies for decades, and then they start to work at this nervous system level, when they start to connect with their bodies, connect with the biology, connect with their emotions, getting emotions out, allowing themselves to feel the panic and the fear, but not fear it. All these pieces that we see and I see, and then we see the results that they are experiencing, and their blood tests are changing without changing anything else. To me, that's enough anecdotal evidence to know that we are onto something here. There was one study published, and I'll find it after I get off, in Israel, working with people that have PTSD using somatic experiencing, and it had a very high p-value, which a low p-value, that basically shows that it was statistically significant that the treatment with somatic experiencing was what was changing the post-traumatic stress in these individuals. So thanks for popping that up. If any of you watch anything, watch this thing that Crystal just popped up, a tribute to Dr. Vincent Felitti. It's compelling, and it's sad to see how it's still so tough for the medical community to accept this research. Even Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a highly, highly well-renowned author, doctor, head of palliative care here in Vancouver for quite a while, head of addiction treatment centers here in what's called the downtown east side of Vancouver, which has the highest usage of drug injection in all of North America. He's seen it all, and he even has said we do not need to do any more research because we know the cause of disease and cancer and all of these autoimmune conditions, and it is untreated survival stress. It is within our system. When it is in our system, it predisposes us such that our predispositions, I should say, for various illnesses get turned on. That is what the epigenetic research is showing. So there's some pretty heavy hitters who have seen this and been around the block way more than I have. And even they are saying we don't need to look at the research anymore because we actually know we have enough evidence. Not everyone's going to be happy with that answer. I think that we've gotten into this scientific situation where we need to have proof, proof, proof. And I would say you have to feel in your own system what feels real and right. Look at the anecdotal evidence. It's still very powerful. And feel into it yourself. Give the work a try, check it out, try it out. It's not going to be for everyone, but I have seen people from so many different communities, so many different levels, different ages with different ailments. When they do the baseline work to restore the nervous system and restore capacity, things really do change. So again, that's my experience and the experience of thousands of my students. I think we've got people from over 63 countries, so this is not a small thing that we're playing with. It's a high end value, if you know what that means in science. So I'm going to pause for today. I recognize that I have not gotten through all of the questions, so I will keep these in my hot little hands and we will move through them over the next few weeks. And be sure to head into my Healthy Nervous System Facebook group if you have not yet. A lot of you ask these questions in there, so I might tag some of these questions and get my team to answer some of them so that your questions can get answered sooner rather than later. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this call about an hour and a half ago, it's a special time of the year because SmartBody, SmartMind, which is my online program that teaches you these skills and more education, starts on March 2nd. We open up registration on Monday, this Monday, February 17th. It's a small window to get in, so learn about the program. If you have any questions about the technical details, specifics, you can always email us, support@irenelyon.com. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for learning. If you're doing this after the call on the replay, thanks for being here as well. And we'll keep talking to you. We'll talk to you later and have a wonderful day. And definitely watch that tribute to Dr. Felitti. It's compelling, and I think he deserves attention because he's really shifted the way we understand health and disease and trauma and the nervous system. All right, everybody, bye for now, and we will see you later.